From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today is a man whose name is synonymous with the sport's evolution and growth. Larry Hill is the visionary behind one of the most recognized drop zones in the world, Skydive Arizona. Larry's influence extends beyond the operation of his famous drop zone. He's been a crucial supporter of competitive skydiving, particularly through his backing of the storied Arizona Airspeed. This support helped catapult the team to national and world recognition, embodying Larry's commitment to excellence and competitive spirit in skydiving. Moreover, Skydive Arizona is not just a drop zone that has hosted every major skydiving event in the world, but a hub for the world's most talented athletes. You would be hard-pressed to find any of today's top competitors who have not journeyed to the town made famous by its drop zone, Eloy. In 2020, Larry was inducted into the International Skydiving Hall of Fame for his tremendous contributions to the sport. Please welcome Larry Hill.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that you thought that much of me.
Yes, sir. I think most of the industry most certainly does. Let's jump right in. Larry, we associate you with Skydive Arizona, but few know your background. Where are you actually from, and can you share some details of your family growing up?
Okay. I grew up in the Midwest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Normal kid stuff at that time. At 17, I joined the United States Air Force just at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And I felt an obligation to do that. I had to get my dad's permission. 4 days after high school, I was in the Air Force, figuring I was going to Vietnam, but they shipped me to Germany after my tech schools, at which point I met a skydiver over there, a D705 Jack Dissinger. Didn't have transportation. I had a car. He taught me into driving him to Spa, Belgium, so he could make a skydive, which I did. Drank a lot of beer, watched him jump, and I said, hey, this is cool. He taught me to skydive. We went through it and had quite a history getting there. 6 months after I was trained, I finally was ready to make the first skydive. Then the airplane broke and had to wait, another 3 months. Finally, on April Fool's Day, 1967, I made my first and second skydive. That night, down just having a fun time, enjoying what I just did, I met my future wife, which we were still married. I left Germany, took her with me to the States, traveled around, and we were in the Air Force. I was skydiving, and we traveled around the world. In 1976, I got stationed to Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. I was stationed at the Philippines at that time. They shipped me to Luke. I had 2 young boys and a family, and skydiving in the 70s was a little different than what it is today. It wasn't a place for a family man and 2 young kids to be hanging around with all the people. I mean, there were good people in that, but it was a different environment that I was used to. I came home one day, told my wife we're going to open a drop zone. It wasn't a skydiving center, it was just a drop zone. After she said yes, because she was also a skydiver, that's how we met. She had started 2 years before me. She said, no problem. I called my brother, borrowed $2,000, put a down payment on a Cessna 182. Had a friend of mine in Oklahoma, had a 182 he sold me, brought it back to Arizona, started working on a little dirt strip behind a bar up in Northwest Phoenix, operated there till 86 when I bought Coolidge and moved down there.
Can I pause you there, Larry? Because you are cruising through many significant moments of your life and I want to dig in just a little bit deeper if I can.
Sure.
I often on this podcast talk about crossroads moments, which are seemingly random moments that change the course of our lives. And you mentioned in 1965, when you were in the Air Force stationed in Germany, that you just happened to have this roommate, Jack Dissinger, who happened to be a skydiver. And, you had the car and the drop zone was in Spa, Belgium. And of course, you're introduced to skydiving there and you meet your wife. I mean, have you ever thought, had you not had Jack not happened to be assigned as your roommate, where your life may be today without Lil and probably without even the hint of Skydive Arizona.
We wouldn't be talking now, for sure. And there were many more whys in the road that I happened to go down the right path. I could run them through real quick on, our relationship. We got married and we traveled and we came back from Germany to the States. That was before cell phones and anything. And she had to fly back on a different airplane than me. I had to find her in New York City. And then we traveled and got stationed in Texas for 6 months. And then they sent me to Denver for another school and then up into New York. And then they sent me to Iceland, where she stayed home because she couldn't take her cat. I came back from Iceland and they sent me to Nellis to work on an airplane I've never worked on before. I was there about 8 months, and then they sent me to Thailand. From there, I went to the Philippines. At that time, I'd been working on airplanes. I decided a career change, so I retrained to become a medic in the Air Force. And why, I don't know. I'm not a real people person, but I did. Because I figured it's better than working outside in the rain and the heat and the cold. And then the whole wing at Clark Air Force Base got sent to Hill Air Force Base when they were replacing the old F-104s with F-15s, except for me, because they said I had retraining approved, but it wasn't allowed because I was frozen to go overseas. I mean, I'd just come from Thailand to the Philippines, and now I got to go to another overseas. And then orders followed, and they shipped me to Luke. We got to Luke, and this is another crossroad that happened. I got orders to go back to Belgium to work on F-15s in Belgium, but I had orders for my retraining approved, and they gave me an option of what to do. I went home and I asked my wife what she wanted to do, and Bitburg Air Force Base was 50 miles from her home. She told me, I said, I don't want to go back to Europe. I want to stay here, so I retrained. That got me there, running a drop zone and staying. And little sidelines like that happened to me, and I went down that path, and I retired out of the Air Force. Never looked for another job. I just started running a drop zone, and here I am today.
If you're a DZO or DZM listening to this podcast, and you're not using Burble, I've got a question. Why not? If the reason is price, what's the cost of your time? Other booking and manifest softwares are a one-size-fits-all. Burble was built from the ground up by a DZO for DZOs to maximize efficiency. Now, isn't that nice? There's no software that compares. Choose Burble. Burble. So 1976, you start a drop zone at Wild Horse West Parachute Center, which is northwest of Phoenix. And I know that what prompted it was, you had some disagreements with, sort of the local jumpers there, as you described, not ideal for a young family man. What was it, though? Because to go, all right, I've had enough. I need to borrow $2,000 from my brother to buy my 182 and start this thing from nothing, and just to operate on a Saturday. That must have been like a huge irritation that leads you to do that.
I just loved the sport. From when I made my first jump, I guess I was hooked. That's I did it everywhere around the world. When I traveled with parachutes, and whenever I could, I made jumps. And of course, Thailand was a little hard during the war, was a little tougher, and Philippines was pretty good because we had a club there, and I became the president of the club, and then we got sent back here, and I was looking to continue on, and I just didn't fit into the crowd, I guess it was. It's not that I didn't. It was a different crowd than I was going to adapt to, and I met some old retired 82nd Airborne guys that had a little place that I jumped with for a little while, and then they got out of the business, so I didn't have a place. I said, well, I'll open my own. That's what I did.
So let's fast forward. 10 years after you started Wild Horse West, the operation really grew, and by 1986, you had 2 Twin Beaches and 2 Cessna 182s, and then disaster strikes. A major thunderstorm essentially destroyed everything with the exception of 1 Twin Beach. Do you remember the day?
It was a Saturday. It came up late in the afternoon, and we hunkered down in these little trailers we had it was a small little drop zone. And we watched the wind and everything and it coming up, and rain was pouring down, and we looked out the door, and all I saw was one of my Twin Beaches flying backwards across. We all ran out and jumped on it. And we found out that's the only one we saved. And then when that was done, the storm was over, I looked over, there was a pile of a 182 with one on top of it, and a twin beach on top of it.
I mean, that must have been then a very dark day of you've been working for 10 years to build this thing, and then you lose basically the entire operation in a matter of an hour.
It wasn't easy to take, but I mean, life has to go on, so I just accepted it. And the next Sunday, we rigged my twin beach, so we were still doing static lines and stuff in those days. So we could do static lines out of the twin beach. We just started operating that way and just had to make the best of what we had.
So why did you choose to leave that location? Because really shortly thereafter, you moved to Coolidge.
Well, Coolidge was operating, and it was a weekend drop zone operating, and I knew the owners, and I mean, would go back and forth and jump there once I established. I mean, I knew the people, and I would be jumping there occasionally and go to their boogies and stuff. And the owner of the business had died, and it went to a friend of his in the fire fighting system. He wasn't a skydiver or anything. There were skydivers running a drop zone. He wanted out because he knew nothing about skydiving except that he inherited this business and he wanted to sell it. And word came to me that he was looking for a buyer, and he thought that I was the only one he wanted to sell it to because he wanted it to keep going. So with that bad luck I just had, I said, well, it's an opportunity. So I contacted him, and we agreed on something, but he had to first let his manager first out rights to refusal to buy it. And the manager at the time really wasn't a skydiver either, so he didn't do it. So I bought Coolidge, and we moved there, and it was called a Coolidge Parachute Center at the time. I was called Wild Horse West Parachute Center, and I'm trying to figure out how do I blend these two businesses together, because the Coolidge Parachute Club's not going to accept Wild Horse West Parachute Center. I wanted to move a little bit away from the reputation they had, and we were just sitting around, and I came up with it. We'll call it Skydive Arizona. And I think in the days, that was some of the first ones being labeled like that, if not the first, I don't remember. So we named it, and that was more of a unifying gesture that I was trying to put forward to bring both groups together.
Larry, you, from the outside appearances, I mean, you seem like a very savvy business person. Why were you so successful, even in the early days of going, okay, I'm negotiating lease agreements or buying aircraft or building a drop zone? Were you sort of learning as you went, or did you have any kind of background in business?
Not really. I graduated out of high school, went in the Air Force, did 20 years in the Air Force, which was a great time in my life. I can't complain about that 20 years. It taught me a lot, educated me a lot, made me very self-sufficient. I just played with instincts what I had, and one of my goals when I talked to my wife about doing so, we decided we wanted to build something that I would and she would want to skydive at and give back. Because most of the skydiving centers at that time were just taking out. They were working out of an old building and not much there except an airplane or a piece of dirt they could land on. And I wanted to do more than that. So that was my goal, was to build something that the skydivers would want to, would feel like it's being generated towards them.
When we look at what you've built now, it seems like, yeah, every good decision, every turn. Larry was very smart, but were you stressed because skydiving then is not what it is today? You're laying out a lot of capital and risk in hopes that this thing will even turn a profit. Did you agonize? Did you lose any sleep through that time?
I was just too busy having fun. Doing what I really did. Sure, there were, I'd get up on a weekend and it was rained out and that, and you said, oh man, how am I going to pay the bill next week? Those kind of things. But that's just part of business. And we worked our way through it, and, I had problems with airplanes at the wrong times, it seems. It's almost like your bank account and the airplanes work together. Whenever there any money in it, the airplane knew how to take it out.
Were there any decisions you made either early on or even through present day that you're like, oh gosh, that was a hard lesson to learn?
Getting in the airplane business and maintaining them and that, had to learn a lot. I had my pilot's license, I had to get my mechanic's license, I got my inspection authorizations license, and I got all the USPA ratings for instructors, jump masters instructors, AFF instructors, tandem masters and that. So I was busy doing that kind of stuff. and basically just having fun. So the negatives got overridden by the positives I was having. So,
Larry, when you arrived in Eloy in 1990, the airport was literally empty, and yet you purchased 88 acres adjacent to it. We all know Skydive Arizona as it looks now, but clearly you had a vision for what it could be, being that it was, no one could find a use for it seemingly prior to yourself. What did you envision for the future? How did you see something that no one else could see?
well, first, when I left Coolidge, it was because I had a meeting with the airport manager and the mayor of Coolidge, and they had brought in the city manager of Eloy to this meeting, and they basically told me Coolidge has this problem with the Air Force, and we need to solve it. Eloy would love to have you, and they'll bend over backwards to work with you. And the problem was they didn't have any land or anything. There was an airport, didn't have space to really skydive on. But they said they could help me. They know a guy that's got 80 acres next to us that they developed as an industrial air park. And it had all the plotting and zoning, had taxiways drawn on it. It was plotted, zoned, and recorded in the county. I would be able to get taxiways that are just like streets touching their airport, running to their runway, and I would have all the benefits of having private land, but access to a municipal airport that they could not stop me from using. When we talked, I decided to do that, and then I had to go over there and look at the facilities they had, which really weren't much. I had one building I could operate out of, and then I had this vacant land next to it with nothing, not a thing on it, no power, no water, no nothing. So I would go over there, and I don't know if you've known the name Dan BC. Everybody knows that.
Sure.
He was over there, and we would fly over there, climb over the fence, and we would walk around on that property, and I would just look at it. I said, well, I think I'm going to put a taxiway here, and we'll build a building here, and swimming pool's going to go over here, and quarters over here for the school. I'll put bunkhouses over here. And that's how I did it. You asked me in hindsight if there was something I would have done different. I would have probably done it more professionally, but I didn't know what it was going to be, what it was going to grow to then either. But we laid it out like that. And then we finalized the deals with the city of Coolidge to buy out my lease. And I had put down had some clauses in there that I had 9 years left on the lease, and the city was not allowed to allow any civilian skydiving at the airport for the length of that lease, which is just typical, in my mind, is normal stuff, because I didn't want to leave and just let somebody else move into what I had developed. And then I worked with the city, and they let me move stuff in and worked with me on building permits and did that. And we started building there. Another person that I had was Brian Burke. He was with me for years, and him and I would go over there every day, trenching power lines and water lines and putting stuff in and building, and that's how we built it.
Remarkable. Did the city of Eloy, they must have been thrilled to have somebody with a vision, because, there wasn't a whole lot going on. You equate to revenue.
Yeah, well, the city manager had there, his name was Ed Beasley, and he had a lot of foresight. And I talked to him, and he talked with me, and we mutually thought that it would be a good move for me to go there, and the city thought it would be good. And so we did it. They made me their service manager at the airport because all their buildings were empty. And part of my job to run a small FBO for them and try to get businesses into the airport, which we did. We brought paint shops and all that, avionics shops in there, and we brought in airborne systems, which is a big show. They're making all the parachutes for the whole United States military and around the world. So I think I benefited them a lot.
A true win-win without a question. The website says on Skydive Arizona's site that you have 5 Super Otters, 7 Skyvans, of course your DC-3. I imagine there's probably a few others in there as well. But what was the key relationship, would you say, that allowed Skydive Arizona to really propel forward from when you first started in Eloy?
I guess a need. I always had a thoughts that skydivers came to my business to skydive and not to listen to excuses why they can't. So that's why I always thought that I needed enough aircraft support because I know airplanes break and they didn't need to hear my problems. Whatever happens behind the scenes, that's none of they don't need to know about. All they needed to know is they wanted to give me some money to skydive and I wanted to take it and provide them with the best services I could and make sure that their stays were good. So that's what we did. And then I got involved in some outside stuff dealing with selling and buying airplanes and I was able to increase my fleet. And we got 6 Super Otters now. Super Otters is kind of a strange thing of how that even developed. But
I'm curious to tell me more about the Super Otters and that development.
Well, typically, the first skydiving Otters were the original 100, 200 series airplanes with PT6-20 engines on it, a little underpowered and stuff. And my first one was like that. I knew there was a way to upgrade the engines on it, so I did that. And so we upgraded the engines to the Dash 27 engines, and we were sitting around the hangar, and we wanted to name our Otter. And we were sitting around, and there was a guy on Airspeed that was a kind of an artist, and he was our cameraman, and he came up, let's call it a Super Otter. He painted an otter with a Superman costume on it, and we put it on the nose of the airplane. So it looked to me like a gopher with a Superman, but it was an otter. It got called Super Otters, and then the industry had to keep up with us, so they started changing theirs. But that's where the name came from.
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
We get people coming, these airplane people that just love airplanes, and they travel around to look for tail numbers of airplanes, and like the Otters. And we've had people come in and they're researching Super Otters, and there's no such thing as a Super Otter. And they'd come to find out what these Super Otters were. So that's what we did.
Oh, remarkable. If you're a fan of the 20-Minute Call, I'd like to personally invite you to become a member of a budding community on Patreon. By becoming a patron of the show, you can join me behind the scenes to discuss options for future guests, chat about things we've already heard, and gain access to some show swag. Details on how to become a patron can be found in the show notes. I'd love for you to join me. Okay, on with today's show. When you come to the drop zone today, are you even ever surprised by it? Like, whoa, with a flashback of where things were back in 1990? Or are you just going, that needs to be improved, that needs to be improved, that needs to be improved?
Well, we do that for sure. Look for improvements. That's why about 5 or 6 years ago, we developed another airport because we were getting busy and running out of airspace. So we bought some land and made another airport for our military stuff. We're always looking for improvements. What's amazing is the change of the sport since I started in the 60s, on round parachutes and squares, and going from style and accuracy and some 4 and 8 way to all the disciplines we have now and the stuff that goes on. It's amazing to watch the development. And I always push freestyle, and people come in with ideas, and we would back them, and we've had fun watching the sport grow.
Larry, you've seen the best of the best come through your doors. Omar Al-Hajjalan, Dan BC, Craig Girard. I mean, the list is long, long, long. Half the Red Bull team, Amy Shamalecki. You've seen it all. Is there any particular folks that have really impressed you, either then or now?
Of course, Dan BC was a real inspiration to me. And to regress a little bit, like 9 years ago, I had a heart transplant to keep me alive. And I credit him as one of the reasons I made it through because of his support. And Carl out of Elstore and the Skydivers. So it's hard for me to say who is the most important in my life because there's so many of them. And there's so many good people in our industry. We're a group of people that are a pretty amazing group of people. And I love them all.
Dan BC speaks of you in the same level of respect. And he tells an incredible tale that when he has told me this, I almost see it as a movie whereby the great Dan BC, though a young Dan BC yet to reach his potential, is driving cross country from Ohio to California. And one early morning, as the sun is rising above the Sonoran Desert, he says, "Oh, I should stop in at this place. I've heard about this Skydive Arizona." And the first person he walks into is you. You know, the rest, as they say, is history. But can you tell your side of the story? Do you remember meeting him that morning?
We were just wandering around on the ramp, and I saw this white van in the sky and introduced each other, talked, and just started talking about stuff. His goal was to go to California and get on a four-way team. And I let him know that we were doing stuff, and it just progressed up to where we got together, and then the history happened.
That seems almost like Providence, right? There's lots of skydivers that are looking for support from a drop zone. But the one guy that you meet is Dan BC, who is so driven to reach his goals. It was like a perfect match. And of course, you would go on to support Airspeed through present day, unprecedented support. And I should ask you, Larry, two questions then. Are you surprised by the support of or by the success of Arizona Airspeed? And secondly, why did you give that level of support for a team that would probably not necessarily give a lot of return? It's not like they're bringing tandems; they're bringing, fun jumpers, which isn't nothing. But the industry knows that that's not necessarily where the money is at.
I don't know. When I first started my drop zone up at Wild Horse, we wanted to do something, and the only time we could find out it wasn't taken, like all the holidays had boogies going on, and it was Valentine's Day. My wife and I came up with an idea that we'll have a Valentine's skydiving meet, because there were no other meets going on in the United States outside of the nationals. That's what we did, and it developed up and moved all the way to Coolidge and everything. And that's the reason I got so involved with four-way and that. 86, I started going. When I bought Coolidge, I said, I got to get more involved and figure out what's going on. I started to attend all the USPA board meetings. And with the prime thing and the safety and training, I would go in. But competition was the committee I hung out at all the time. And I got to know everybody, and they got to know me a little bit. And so from 86 until 97, I was just there on my own money and going there to make sure I knew what was going on in the sport and, in competition. And then 97, I ran for the board and got on. And 91 maybe it was, I started going to the international skydiving meetings, the IPC and that. And I've made every meeting since 91 at the IPC except one. So I just got involved with it and enjoyed it.
And then you had an idea to have a flagship team based at your drop zone, Arizona Airspeed.
We did that. Yeah, I said, we had supported a team over in Coolidge called the Coolidge Force and stuff. And it was going. And then some of those members had to drop out and do stuff. And Dan BC came to me one day and said he wanted to put a team together. And basically what I told him was, I said, well, I'll support it. And I told him what I would do. And I asked him what he would do for me. And I said, but I'm not going to get into a bidding match with other drop zones. All I'm going to do is I'll tell you what I'll give you, and you can tell me what you'll give me. And then he came up with the names of the people he wanted on his team. And it was a little interesting story, one of the first team members with Jack Jeffries. He's a great guy, but he was a young kid then. When we first held the first nationals outside of Muskogee, he wrote that we're going from one shithole to another. And I never let him forget that. And I told Dan, I said, okay, Dan, people you got are fine, but you're going to control that little punk. Those are the words. I tell Jack that all the time. He knows it. And I said, you're going to have to control that little punk. And we built a team, and they were a great bunch of guys.
Oh, that's a great story.
And then I had a chance when Greg Girard got out of the Army. And I used to support the Golden Knights all the time and that. And I looked at what I was able to do and what the U.S. government was doing. And I came up with the idea that we're going to compete against the U.S. government and make an 8-way team. And I got Craig Girard now that I could that'll come in on the team, and we'll combine Airspeed and Craig and 3 others, and we'll go against the Army. And we did. So, but it was more fun that I was having, and just enjoying competitions and giving back what I could.
I have been fortunate to have Craig and Ileana and Dan BC on this program, and Mike McGowan. And they all, either on the show or in private conversation, have all talked about you. And one thing that Mike McGowan mentioned, and I'm starting to see almost a trend, is that, for example, your relationship with Mike is really on a handshake, as was, these other folks. And yet seldom today do you see relationships that have stood the test of time between you and the folks that you've supported. Is that a read that you have, just sort of a sense of people that, yeah, this will probably be a good thing? I mean, or is this just luck?
Maybe some of both. Not everyone's worked out that way. I like to feel I always have. And overall, I've benefited from it. It works great.
Larry, being a DZO is a roller coaster ride, as most DZOs will happily share. But of course, when you own one of the largest and busiest skydiving centers in the world, the challenges are significant, considering fatalities, aircraft maintenance occurring at the worst possible times, rising costs, staffing challenges. What has been one of the most challenging times you've experienced as a dropzone owner? Or is that every day?
Well, you always have stuff, but I've never considered them the most challenging of anything. I used to have a philosophy, and I tried to raise my kids this way. I would always tell them, I said, if you need to do something, anybody can do the easy stuff. Most people can do the hard stuff. And it takes a good character, a person, to do the impossible stuff. And that's what I wanted to instill into them. You can do the impossible if you set your mind to it. And you keep a positive attitude. So the worst thing that happens, you find a good side of, well, that gives me an opportunity to do this now. You find the good side of the worst. And that's what I've tried to do.
So in all your years, you've never had the thought of just wanting to toss in the towel because of this or that, or never thought this is too much for me today?
No, we've joked a lot of times that my wife and I, well, maybe the little Japanese guy will be showing up with a suitcase full of money and want to buy this, and we can retire. But we know that's never going to happen, because I don't think anybody could do that. And if it ever happened, I probably would say no.
To the relief, many skydivers listen to this, happily hearing that. This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. Now, I'm not a fan of lots of ads during a podcast. I mean, who likes ads? So I'll stop talking about how marvelously wonderful Beyond Marketing is. But if you're curious about what the amazing people of Beyond Marketing do to help dropzones and manufacturers thrive, then you should check out their website at dropzone.marketing. That's dropzone.marketing. Larry, Skydive Arizona has hosted every major event the sport, has to put on. Many U.S. and collegiate nationals, World Cups, World Meets. You name it, you've done it. Is there a specific event you're particularly proud of?
No, I've watched them all grow from when it was really easy to run a nationals to where they're getting pretty complicated. And once canopy piloting got around to where I thought it was getting safer and the competitors were getting educated, because I was against canopy piloting for a long time because it's the most dangerous. So a number of years ago, I came and said, well, if we want to stay on top as a drop, we're going to have to build the best pond we can to invite them over. So that's what we did. That's my philosophies. I've got one more thing in the back of my mind. I'm not going to put it out right now that I still want to do, because nobody thinks you could do it in Arizona, but we'll see. It might happen.
All right. You've got my wheels turning. I'm imagining something to do with a lot of water, but...
No, not water, but it's an event.
All right. Okay. Stay tuned, everyone.
But anyway, my wife and I have had a great time doing what we've done, and we would never do anything different, I don't think.
Yeah, that passion comes through. Larry, I remember in the early 2000s, the wind tunnel being built at Skydive Arizona, and whoever was doing your marketing at that time did a great job of showing, time lapses of the tunnel being built and its most unique design rising out of the desert. And this would be a big piece of the puzzle of yet drawing more people to want to come to your drop zone. What compelled you to make that major investment?
Well, it was becoming obvious it could be a good training tool for skydivers. And people were asking me, why would I build it out in this drop zone? Why don't we do it downtown Phoenix where I said, I'm not building a Disneyland ride. I'm building a training device. And my whole goal was to train skydivers. And it turned out the military found it very useful in that. And sure, first-time flyers are nice to have, but they were never the goal of the tunnel. Not like most of them that are built now are built in urban areas, and they got to be around high-density places where they get all kinds of people coming in. I didn't look at it that way. I just looked at it as I want to have a training tool.
I think it paid off.
I think so. I mean, it was like the third tunnel in the United States. You had Rayford, Paris, and then Orlando. And Rayford was a military, but there's Orlando, then Paris built one. And this was the next generation tunnels that we studied because we didn't think recirculators could be practical enough. This tunnel was built and it's got really good air. It flies good. It's got some drawbacks that recirculators don't have, but it's got some advantages that they don't have. So it still flies everything that we can do.
I assume you worked with Bill Kitchen on that project, who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame himself.
Well, it was funny. Bill wanted me to take over the project, over the Skyrider, and he'd come to me one time and was hoping I would buy him out and take it over, but it wasn't me. And then I got involved after Alan Metney bought the company from Bill. But Alan was on our 8-way team, so we got together and we built a tunnel.
I was going to say, it's such a small little world that Alan Metney would be on Airspeed and have an association with you and then go on to really build iFly as we know it today. It's remarkable. Small world.
It is.
Let's close out with 2 questions, if you don't mind. Larry, many people look up to you for the drop zone and the business that you've built. Who do you look up to? Who has been a mentor to you?
Oh, there's a number of names. Bill Otley and I were friends. He was a character, but he had visions and stuff. Bill Otley's, he's trying to remember all the names of the people. Dan Pointers, who by trying to Captain Hook, I just went blank on his name, out of California, and Captain Hook's 8-way team. Got me involved in wanting to hold nationals when we first did it. I got those kind of people. Claude Gerard from Australia, when I decided to do my first world meet, I confided in him a lot to get help on making sure I could do a good one. Sherry Shrimpshire.
All legends.
There are a lot of people like that. There's too many for me to even remember and name them all.
Larry, final question. If an aspiring drop zone owner were to call you up and ask for some advice, what advice would you give? Well,
it takes a lot of your effort to make it happen. And you should have a passion for what you want to do. That's how you're successful. If you're really involved in what you want to do and you're not looking at it as just a profit way to make money or that, because I could never do that. I had everything that came in, we always turned it right back out. And then somehow it grew into what it did on me. And that's just because I kept having fun doing what I was doing.
Sage advice. Larry, thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor for me to speak with you, and thank you for being an example to us all in the industry.
Well, thanks for wanting to talk to me and stuff, and open my eyes that maybe a few people know me too. So,
sure enough. Thanks, Larry. Have a super day.
Okay. You too. Thanks.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode, which is released every Monday. If you want to contact the team, our email address is podcast@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us next week for our next episode.